Hi, I'm Mark Skelsey, editor here at downsizing.com.au. So today we're going to be trying something a little bit new and recording an interview with an expert about an interesting new downsizing trend related to the coronavirus pandemic. To discuss this research further, I'm being joined by my colleague Lisa Phillips, downsizing.com.au's social media spokesperson, and good morning to you, Lisa.
Good morning, Mark. Great to be here.
Great. So now the research we're going to be talking about this morning relates to the fact that during the pandemic, children are placing more focus and attention on their parents than ever before, which is leading to many older Australians to rethink their retirement plans. Now, the research has been prepared and released by retirement living operator Stockland. And to further discuss this research today, we're speaking with Dr. Sarah Cotton, hello Sarah, a psychologist and co-director of work-life wellbeing support company Transitioning Well. Now I'm pleased to announce, as we can see, that Dr. Cotton has agreed to join us and Lisa online to further explain the research, and welcome Dr. Cotton, or should we say Sarah? What's best?
Sarah's great. Sarah is absolutely fine. It's great to be part of the conversation, Mark. Thanks for welcoming me in.
Great. So Lisa, I think you're kicking off with the first question.
Yes, well, hi Sarah.
Hi, Lisa.
I was particularly interested in your research because I do have elderly parents, so this is very relevant to me. So the research seems to show that during coronavirus, children are more likely to reach out to their parents to ensure that they're safe and secure. Can you go into a bit more detail about this?
Yeah, it was really interesting trend actually, Lisa. And I don't think anecdotally, I suppose it doesn't surprise all of us, but what the research found really strongly is that adult children were actually being really consciously more aware of the safety and health and well-being and vulnerability actually of their older parents. But what we found really interesting in this research was that 63% of adult kids actually were more proactive in actually reaching out to their parents. That's pretty significant, isn't it? 63% were actually more proactive in actually intentionally reaching out, and 42% of adult children said they actually feel closer to their older parents off the back of COVID than they did prior to COVID. So I think they're really significant stats.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. I mean, it's amazing all these changes that are COVID related.
Absolutely, Mark.
Yeah, we've released a paper this week about a lot of the changes and the sorts of different housing that people are looking for during COVID as well. So, but based on your research, it currently looks as though we've got helicopter children rather than the traditional situation of helicopter parents, which I'm sure some parents probably quite enjoy. Now, do you think it's likely that older Australians are more likely to be rethinking their retirement plans, in part as a result of the conversations they're having with their children?
Yeah, I think COVID's been a real disruptor, Mark, to thinking about retirement. I think even before COVID, we were seeing people really redefining and shaking up the whole idea of retirement. But I think COVID has absolutely really got us thinking even more so differently about that. And the Stockland Retirement Living Research, and I'll just read these stats out now because they're actually really quite interesting statistics that came out. And what the studies showed is that 73% of older Australians off the back of COVID were actually more aware of their own vulnerability. So 73% saying, actually, I'm even more aware of my own vulnerability. And 71% of older Australians also actually showed that they're actually more conscious of their own health and well-being. So being more proactive, being more conscious of what that actually was for them, rather than, I guess, just living in automatic pilot and probably not putting as much thought and intention. COVID has really got people thinking about it.
We're starting to have serious conversations with our parents in light of COVID, maybe that we wouldn't have had before. And it can be quite difficult to broach this subject with parents. Do you have any tips for how to have a conversation with parents about this?
Yeah, I think, Lisa, it's such a good point that you make. It can be tricky sometimes, can't it? These are really personal conversations that we have with our parents. And I always say, there's a saying that I often talk to my clients about, is sometimes it's about choosing the courage to have the conversation, choose resentment rather than, choose just to be able to actually really be able to have these conversations rather than living in resentment. So it's sometimes, it takes that courage. But what I would say, there's probably three things I would say, Lisa, for really thinking about having these conversations. Is the first one is just just to test out your own assumptions about retirement. As we were saying earlier, retirement's looking really different for people. We're living longer, we're healthier, there's a lot more options that we actually have available to us today. So I think as adult children, we actually have to get clear with our own assumptions about, when we hear the word retirement, what does that actually mean? And then I think before we have the conversation, as well as sort of getting straight on our assumptions, I think it's really important that we actually sit down and think about our own thoughts and feelings about retirement, and before we even go into that conversation. And then I think thirdly, sometimes, when we have these tricky conversations as adult kids, it's really rushy. Or mum or dad, while we're on the phone or quickly running out, dropping kids off, or, after a family lunch or a family tea. What we really encourage people to do is find times where you're not rushed, where you can actually be able to sit down and actually have these conversations in a really meaningful way, rather than feeling like you've got to rush in and out of them, where you actually don't have the time to really listen. And I always say, Lisa, the good old advice is, seek to understand before you actually be understood. And I think that's a great motto, I think, for us as adult children too, is just to be able to make sure that we listen first.
That's really good advice.
Absolutely. So Sarah, I also understand that the Stockland research shows that people already living in retirement villages during the pandemic are significantly less likely to worry about their future. Can you maybe take us through just some of the findings that were found there, if possible?
Yeah, I think, Mark, we saw a lot of worry, didn't we, just in the general population in COVID. But I think for older Australians, there was, increase in worry. But what the research found, which is really interesting, Mark, was that those actually living in retirement living at the time of the pandemic showed significant lower levels of worry and higher levels of what we saw around optimism, so being more optimistic, being more positive, and actually feeling safer. In fact, 72% of the people that were in retirement living who sort of participated, if you like, in this survey said that they actually felt safer, less lonely. And I suppose, you can understand why, with that sense of community that often occurs in that retirement living. And half of them actually felt more cared for. So some really interesting stats there, Mark. But I think overall, what we saw is that a lot of people were actually rethinking retirement. I think, that's the message, and where they actually want to live. Nearly half of the population in this survey were really reevaluating, where they were going to live. And I think that's so applicable for your audience, Mark, as they think about downsizing and what all that means. I think COVID has really got people thinking very differently about community and connection and safety.
So really, finally, would you say, it's fair to say that maybe COVID, there's a silver lining in terms of, children getting in contact with their parents? I think that's a really important thing. Just a sense of more family and making sure that they're happy and secure. Maybe that's a good thing to come out of COVID. Maybe we'll have a happy Christmas after all.
Yeah, I can't believe we're only 5 weeks away from Christmas. Yeah. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But absolutely, Lisa, I think, with all the challenges that COVID has brought us, and really real challenges, hasn't it? It's been a really tough year. But we know with any transition that there's also really amazing opportunities that come. And I think this sense of us really reevaluating what matters most, and that's what we've seen, and this is what this research shows us, is, being apart from family, being separated for family for many of us. And even, with the Adelaide borders closing and what's happening in Adelaide, some of us are still separated from our families. It's got us really thinking about what matters most about that connection and that community. And I guess, Lisa, leading into Christmas, some of us still might be separated from family, but I think it's about, just creatively finding ways to stay connected, so that we can, really, have the best Christmas that we all can which has been a really challenging time for many of us.
Mm.
Fantastic. So look, as we can see, there's some pretty interesting perspectives coming out of this research. There's perspectives about increased interaction between children and their parents. There's perspectives about parents of rethinking their retirement plans at the moment. And there's some interesting new research about where people are feeling safest and most secure, and that retirement villages are actually coming out of that pretty well. So a lot to absorb. We will be doing a story on this in the newsroom that you can look up as well. And we hope that maybe people look at this video alongside reading that story as well, so they can dive in. But ultimately, I'd really like to thank my fellow interviewer, Lisa, today. And I'd like to thank Sarah as well for for joining us and giving her time today, and we hope that this has been useful for our readers. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
See you later.